The first time Song-woo felt his hand tremble, he was holding a gun to a man's head in a warehouse on the south side of Chicago. Not from fear, never from fear. The tremor came when he saw the photograph that fell from the man's wallet. A little girl with pigtails, maybe 5 years old, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth. Song pulled the trigger anyway. That was 17 years ago, and he'd learned to keep his hands steady ever since. Until the day a child's voice cut through the winter air outside his penthouse in Manhattan's Koreatown, and asked him a question no one had dared ask in decades. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment when the most feared Korean mobster on the East Coast discovered that some forces in this world are more dangerous than bullets. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching. We love to know our global family is growing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because tomorrow we're dropping another story you absolutely cannot miss. Now let me tell you about Song-woo. They called him Jewel, the mirror, because looking into his eyes was like staring into your own death. In the hierarchy of the Korean-American organized crime families that controlled everything from the Bronx to Boston, Song-woo sat at the apex. He'd built his empire the old way, with blood and silence, transforming his late father's small protection racket into a sophisticated network that moved everything from pharmaceutical-grade precursors to real estate portfolios that would make legitimate businessmen weep with envy. At 43, Song had perfected the art of existing between worlds. To the FBI, he was a venture capitalist with an unfortunate family history. To the Russians who controlled Brighton Beach, he was a necessary evil, someone you partnered with or you disappeared. To his own people, the Korean families who'd fled poverty and persecution to build new lives in America's shadows, he was both protector and predator. Song didn't celebrate Christmas. He didn't celebrate anything. His penthouse in the glass tower on West 32nd Street remained dark every December, while the rest of Manhattan transformed into a carnival of lights. His mother had loved Christmas, before the cancer took her when he was 9. His father had forbidden celebrations after that, calling them weak, American, a distraction from the only thing that mattered, power. December 23, 2019. The temperature in New York City had dropped to 14 degrees, and snow fell like shattered diamonds. Song stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city below, when his phone buzzed. It was Min-jun, his second-in-command. "We've got a problem at the restaurant." The restaurant, Hannah Garden in the Diamond District, was one of their legitimate fronts, a place where real customers ate real food while the backroom hosted meetings that decided who lived and who became a statistic. Song grabbed his black wool coat and headed down. The problem turned out to be a waitress who'd gotten herself into debt with a loan shark, not one of theirs, which made it both an insult and an opportunity. Song walked through the kitchen where staff members averted their eyes, through the back office where Min-jun waited with the trembling woman. Her name was Whitney May. 28 years old, honey-brown skin, exhausted eyes that still somehow held defiance. She stood barely 5'4" but didn't cower when Song entered the room. "You borrowed money from the Italians," Song said in English. His accent minimal, refined. $30,000. "My daughter needed surgery." Whitney's voice shook but didn't break. "Her heart. The insurance wouldn't cover it. I did what I had to do." Song studied her. Single mother, nursing school dropout, working 3 jobs judging by the calendar visible on her phone screen. The Italians had charged her 40% interest, compounded weekly. The kind of predatory nonsense that made Song's own family's 20% seem charitable. "How much do you owe now?" $47,000. "I've been paying but the interest." "I'll handle it," Song said. Whitney's eyes widened. "You work here now. Full-time. You follow my rules, you're under my protection. The Italians won't touch you. But you belong to me until the debt is paid." "Understood." It wasn't generosity. It was business. The Italians had been encroaching on Korean territory for months. This was a message. What Song didn't expect was for Whitney to say, "I need to pick up my daughter by 6. Every day. Non-negotiable." Minjun actually laughed. No one gave Song Woo conditions. But Song found himself nodding. Fine. That night, Song's crew paid a visit to Polly Marchese's social club in Little Italy. The conversation was brief, professional, and backed by the implicit understanding that Song controlled the heroin coming through Red Hook. Whitney's debt vanished from the Italians' books. In return, Song promised not to expand his gambling operations into Staten Island. Business. Whitney started work the next day. She was efficient, quiet, and never asked questions. But every afternoon at 5:30, she'd remove her apron and leave, no matter what was happening. Song found it interesting. In his world, loyalty was demanded, commanded, beaten into people. Whitney's loyalty was to something else entirely. 2 days before Christmas, Song was leaving the restaurant when he heard the voice. "Mr." He turned. A little girl stood on the sidewalk, maybe 6 years old, wearing a pink puffy coat that had seen better winters and a knit hat with a unicorn on it. Her skin was the same warm brown as Whitney's, and her eyes held that same defiant spark. "Yes," Song said, uncertain why he was engaging. "Are you my mama's boss?" "I suppose I am. She says you're very important and very busy." The girl tilted her head. "But do important people celebrate Christmas?" Song felt something strange in his chest. "Some do. We have a tree. It's small but it's pretty. And Mama made cookies even though she's tired all the time." The girl stepped closer. "Will you come to our house? For Christmas? Mama says you don't have family." Song Woo, the man who'd orchestrated the disappearance of 17 people, who controlled a criminal network worth $200 million, who'd once stared down a Russian bratva boss and made him blink first, had no idea how to respond to this child. "Lily." Whitney appeared, breathless, grabbing her daughter's hand. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Song. She doesn't understand. What's your address?" Song heard himself say. Whitney stared. "What? Your address? For Christmas?" He saw the calculations running behind Whitney's eyes. The fear, the confusion, the desperate hope that this wasn't some kind of test. Finally, she pulled out a receipt and wrote on the back. An address in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. The kind of neighborhood where people worked 2 jobs and still barely made rent. 6 o'clock, Whitney said quietly. "Christmas Eve. If you're serious." Song took the receipt. "I'm always serious." He walked away, leaving Whitney and Lily on the frozen sidewalk, aware that Minjun was going to have questions he couldn't answer. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in fresh snow and the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. Song spent the morning handling business. A meeting with their accountant about the property acquisitions in Queens, a call with their connection in the Port Authority about a delayed shipment, a brief but pointed conversation with a lieutenant who'd gotten sloppy. At 5 o'clock, he stood in his penthouse, staring at the address on the receipt. Every instinct told him not to go. This was foolish, unnecessary, a crack in the armor he'd spent decades forging. But he found himself in his car, with Minjun driving, heading toward Brooklyn. "Boss, you sure about this?" Minjun ventured. "No," Song said honestly. They stopped at a store. Song had no idea what to bring to a child's Christmas, so he bought everything. Toys, books, a stuffed animal the size of a small person. Minjun carried the bags with an expression that suggested he'd seen everything now. The building in Sunset Park was a 4-story walk-up with cracked stucco and windows that rattled in the wind. Song climbed to the 3rd floor, Minjun behind him with the bags. He knocked. Lily answered, her face exploding into joy. "You came. Mama." "Mama, the important man came." Whitney appeared, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, Song saw not a waitress, not a debtor, but just a woman who'd been beautiful before life had tried to grind her down. "You actually came," she whispered. "I said I would." The apartment was tiny, a living room that bled into a kitchen, 2 bedrooms. Song could see down a short hallway. But it was warm, and it smelled like cinnamon and something baking, and there was indeed a small tree in the corner, decorated with homemade ornaments and lights that probably came from a dollar store. Lily dragged Song to the couch and showed him every ornament, explaining the story behind each one. Minjun stood by the door like a confused sentinel until Whitney invited him in. They ate dinner. Nothing fancy, just chicken and rice and vegetables, but Whitney had cooked it with care. Lily talked constantly, asking Song questions about Korea even though he'd been born in Los Angeles, about Christmas in other countries, about whether reindeer were real. Song found himself actually answering, not deflecting or intimidating or ending conversations with silence. After dinner, Lily opened her presents, the massive pile from Song and 2 small packages from Whitney. Coloring book and new crayons. The girl's joy was identical for both. Then Lily insisted Song help her build the toy castle he'd bought, and for an hour, the most dangerous man in New York City sat on a worn carpet assembling pink plastic towers while a 6-year-old girl directed him like a tiny general. When Lily finally fell asleep on the couch, Whitney carried her to bed. She returned and sat across from Song, exhaustion and something else, fear maybe or anticipation in her eyes. "Why did you really come?" she asked. Song considered lying. He'd built his life on calculated deception. But something about this small, warm apartment made him want to tell the truth. "Because she invited me. And no one's done that in 23 years. Since your mother died." It wasn't a question. Whitney had clearly asked around, learned his history. "My father said Christmas was for the weak." That sentiment survived. Whitney leaned forward. "You know what I think. I think your father was wrong. I think the strongest thing anyone can do is let people in. Let yourself feel something besides rage or control." He paused. "You paid off my debt. You didn't have to do that. It was business. Was it? Or did you see a mother trying to save her daughter and remember what it felt like to lose yours?" Song stood abruptly. This was too much, too close. "I should go." Whitney stood too, moving close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something cheap but sweet. "Thank you for coming." It meant everything to Lily. And honestly, it meant something to me too. Song Woo had kissed women before. Many women. But standing in that cramped apartment with Christmas lights twinkling and a child soft breathing down the hall, when Whitney May rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, it felt like the first time. He kissed her back. Gently at first, then deeper. His hand finding the small of her back while hers pressed against his chest. When they broke apart, both breathless, Song knew he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. "I can't," he started. "I know what you are," Whitney said. "I'm not stupid. But I also know what you did for me. For Lily. Maybe you're not just the mirror. Maybe there's something else underneath." Song left without answering, Min-jun following silently. In the car, his second spoke carefully. "Boss, this is complicated." "I know." But Song went back. The next day, then the day after. Not to the apartment. That would have been too obvious, too dangerous. He had Whitney meet him at a cafe in Midtown, then a gallery in Chelsea where they walked among paintings neither of them fully understood. They talked. She told him about growing up in Atlanta, about coming to New York with dreams of being a nurse, about the moment the doctor told her Lily's heart had a defect that would kill her without surgery. Song told her about his father's funeral, about taking over the organization at 26, about the night he'd realized he'd become exactly what his father had molded him to be. "You could be something else," Whitney said. "No," Song replied. "I couldn't. This life doesn't let you leave. Then make it better. You have power. use it to protect instead of just control. It was naive, idealistic, impossible. But Song found himself thinking about it. January brought problems. The Russians were moving product through channels they'd agreed were Song's territory. Polly Marchese was making noise about the debt forgiveness, claiming Song had disrespected their arrangement. And someone, Song didn't know who yet, was leaking information to the FBI about their pharmaceutical operation. Song handled it the way he always did. Efficiently, ruthlessly, with enough violence to make the point but not so much it started a war. 3 Russians disappeared. Polly received a visit that left him understanding the hierarchy. The FBI leak was plugged, literally and permanently. But now people noticed that Song Woo seemed different, distracted. Min Jun finally asked the question everyone was thinking. Is it the woman? It's nothing. Boss, they're watching her. The Italians, maybe the Russians. If they think she matters to you. She doesn't. But she did. Song knew it, Min Jun knew it, and worse, the enemies knew it. The call came on February 9th at 3 a.m. Whitney's voice, terrified, barely coherent. They took her. They took Lily. They said you'd know what they want. Song was moving before she finished speaking. He dressed in 30 seconds, called Min Jun and 4 others. By the time he reached his car, he knew who'd done it. Polly Marchese, making a play to embarrass Song and grab leverage. The Italian had taken a child to make a point about respect and territory. They found Whitney at her apartment, barely holding together. Song had seen combat veterans with more composure than this terrified mother. Where? Song asked. I don't know. They called from a blocked number. They said they'd call back with demands. Whitney grabbed his arm. Please. Please, she's all I have. I don't care what you have to do. I'll bring her home. Song's voice was cold steel. I promise. He'd broken many promises in his life. This wouldn't be one of them. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in controlled fury. Song activated every asset, called in every favor, leaned on every connection. By dawn, his people had traced the call to a warehouse in Red Hook. Song took 12 men, enough to make a statement but not so many it looked like a war. They hit the warehouse at 7 a.m. fast, brutal, surgical. 4 Italians were dead before they knew what happened. Song found Polly in the back office, a gun already in his hand but terror in his eyes. She's just a kid, Polly, Song said quietly. You made this personal. You disrespected us, Polly stammered. You think you run everything. Song shot him in the knee. Polly's scream echoed off concrete walls. Where is she? Different location. Insurance. You kill me, they kill her. Song knelt down. His gun pressed against Polly's forehead. Then you better call them right now and tell them to let her go. Because if anything happens to that child, I will erase every Marchese from existence. Your cousins in Boston, your uncle in Miami, your mother in that nice house in Westchester. Everyone. He meant it. Polly saw it in his eyes, the mirror showing him his own death and the death of everyone he'd ever loved. Polly made the call. Song found Lily an hour later in an apartment in Bensonhurst, scared but unharmed. She cried when she saw him, running into his arms. Song held her, this tiny, fragile thing, and felt something inside him break and rebuild simultaneously. He brought her home. Whitney collapsed when she saw her daughter, sobbing, holding Lily so tight the girl squeaked. Over Whitney's shoulder, Lily looked at Song with absolute trust. I knew you'd come, the little girl said. You're like a hero. Song Woo, killer, criminal, the man they called the Mirror, felt tears on his face for the first time in 34 years. The next 3 weeks were war, but quiet war. The kind fought in parking lots and backrooms, with whispered threats and sudden disappearances. Song dismantled Polly's operations piece by piece. The message was clear. You could challenge Song-woo, but you couldn't threaten his family. His family. Whitney understood what had happened that night. Song had crossed a line he could never uncross. He'd shown the world what mattered to him, and in this life that was a fatal mistake. You should disappear, Song told her one night, standing in her apartment while Lily slept. I'll give you money, new identities. Go somewhere they'll never find you. And you? Whitney asked. I stay. This is my world. Then we stay too. Whitney moved closer. You think I don't understand what you did? You went to war for my daughter. You think I'm going to run away from that? It's not safe. It's never been safe. But at least now we're together. Song kissed her then, desperate and gentle like she might vanish. They made love in her small bedroom with moonlight coming through cheap curtains, and for those few hours, Song-woo forgot about empires and enemies and the price of weakness. Spring came. Song moved them out of Sunset Park. Too exposed, too vulnerable. He bought a townhouse in Park Slope under a shell corporation, quiet but secure. Whitney fought him on it until she realized her daughter's safety wasn't negotiable. Lily started calling him Uncle Song, then just Song, then finally one night at dinner, Dad. Song looked at Whitney, who had tears in her eyes. He looked at this child who'd somehow decided he was worth loving. And he heard himself say, Yeah, kiddo. I'm here. The cost was higher than Song anticipated. 2 of his lieutenants questioned his judgment. Song had to make examples, painful ones, to maintain respect. The FBI increased their scrutiny, sensing vulnerability. The Russians pushed boundaries, testing whether Song-woo was still the man they feared. He was. If anything, he was more dangerous now, a cornered animal with something to protect. But the strangest thing happened. Song's organization became tighter, more loyal. Because the men who worked for him saw what he'd done for Whitney and Lily, and they understood that this boss would actually go to war for his people. Not just as assets but as human beings. In June, Whitney was walking home from the market when a car pulled up beside her. Song's security team moved instantly, but not before Whitney saw the face in the back seat. Old Man On, the Korean godfather who'd been Song's father's boss decades ago. The man technically above Song in the hierarchy. That night, On came to Song's office. Ancient, withered, but still sharp as a blade. The girl changed you, On said in Korean. The girl taught me something, Song replied in English, a small act of defiance. Your father would be ashamed. My father built an empire on fear. I'm building one on loyalty. Which do you think lasts longer? On studied him. You're risking everything for a woman and a child who aren't even yours. They are mine. That's the point. The old man smiled, actually smiled. Your father was my friend, but he was wrong about many things. Perhaps you found the balance he never could. Understood. You have my blessing. But Songa never show weakness again. What you did, bringing them into your life, that was strength. But if you flinch, if you hesitate, they will devour you. Song bowed his head. I understand. August 17, 2020. Song-woo stood in his living room in Park Slope, watching Whitney teach Lily to dance while music played from a cheap speaker. Lily was laughing, Whitney was smiling, and for a moment, just a moment, Song forgot about the weight he carried. Then his phone buzzed. Minjun. We need to talk. Tonight. Song excused himself to his study. Minjun arrived an hour later with news that froze Song's blood. The FBI had convened a grand jury. They had a witness willing to testify about the pharmaceutical operation. If the indictment came down, Song was looking at 20 years minimum. Who's the witness? Minjun hesitated. Your cousin. Jin Ho. Family. It always came back to family. Jin Ho had been skimming, Song had confronted him. And now the little bastard was trading testimony for immunity. Song could run. He had money hidden, documents ready, connections in 6 countries. But running meant leaving Whitney and Lily, and he'd die before doing that. Set up a meeting with Jin Ho, Song said. Family should talk before lawyers get involved. The meeting happened in a parking garage in Queens. Jin Ho brought his lawyer, which told Song everything about where his cousin's loyalty lay. Don't do this, Song said simply. Please. You embarrassed me, Jin Ho spat. You chose that woman over your blood. I chose loyalty over greed. There's a difference. Jin Ho's lawyer stepped forward. Mr. Song, my client has been very clear. Song pulled his gun. Not to shoot, just to remind everyone who they were dealing with. You testify, you destroy everyone in this family. Not just me, everyone. The families who depend on us for protection, for income. You understand that. The FBI will protect us. Song laughed, bitter and cold. No, they won't. And even if they do, I'll find you. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. That's not a threat, Jin Ho. That's just the truth. He walked away. 3 days later, Jin Ho disappeared. Not killed. Song wasn't that careless with the FBI watching. Just disappeared. Relocated to a monastery in South Korea where monks asked no questions and the internet didn't exist. The grand jury dissolved without their witness. But the cost was Song's relationship with the old guard. They saw him as weak now, compromised. Plots began forming in shadows. Song heard whispers of a coup, of younger lieutenants who thought they could take what he'd built. He confronted them in September. 5 men in his inner circle, meeting at a warehouse Song controlled. He laid out evidence of their betrayal, recorded conversations, financial records, proof of their conspiracy. You want what I have, Song said, standing before them. I understand. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't build this through violence alone. I built it through loyalty, through making people believe in something more than just money and fear. You built it through fear, one Lieutenant Park challenged. And you're losing that. Song nodded to Min-jun. The lights went out. When they came back on 60 seconds later, Song held a gun to Park's head while Min-jun covered the others. I haven't lost anything, Song said softly. I've evolved. You can evolve with me, or you can find out whether the old Song-woo is actually gone. Park lived. They all lived. But they understood. Song-woo might have a family now, might have found something like redemption, but the monster was still there, just leashed, not dead. Christmas 2020 arrived with snow and something like peace. Song-woo stood in his Park Slope townhouse, watching Lily and Whitney decorate a tree that actually touched the ceiling this time. He'd closed the office early, told his people he was unreachable until the 26th. Lily hung an ornament, a small mirror with Song painted on it, and grinned at him. For you. So you remember you're part of the family now. Song took the ornament, this silly little piece of glass, and felt his throat tighten. A mirror. That's what they called him. But looking at this ornament he saw something different. Not death reflected back, but light, potential, a future that wasn't just about survival. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Song and Whitney sat by the fire he'd insisted on installing. She curled into his side, her head on his chest. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Everything you've had to do to protect us. Song thought about the bodies, the betrayals, the cost of keeping his 2 worlds from destroying each other. No, he said truthfully. I regret that I waited 43 years to find out what I was missing. And what was that? A reason to be more than what I was made to be. Whitney lifted her head and kissed him. You were always more. You just needed someone to show you. The life didn't get easier. The FBI kept investigating. Rivals kept pushing. The organization required constant maintenance. Constant shows of strength balanced with the loyalty Song had cultivated. But Song-woo had something now that he'd never had before. A reason to come home. Lily grew. Smart, fierce, full of questions about the world. Song tutored her in math, taught her Korean, told her stories about her heritage that weren't sanitized versions but real history, both beautiful and brutal. Whitney went back to nursing school, and Song paid for it without telling her until the debt she thought she was accruing simply vanished. On Lily's 7th birthday, she asked Song a question that broke his heart. "Will you always be here?" Song knelt down to her level. "I can't promise always, kiddo. This world I live in, it's dangerous. But I can promise that every single day I have, I'll fight to come home to you and your mom. That's the best I can offer." Lily hugged him. "That's enough." Years passed. Song stepped back from day-to-day operations, becoming more of an advisor than a hands-on boss. He chose his successor carefully, Min Jun, who understood that strength and compassion weren't opposites. The FBI eventually moved on to easier targets. The Russians and Italians found their equilibrium with Song's organization, a détente born from mutual respect and exhaustion. Song Woo never became legitimate. The blood on his hands didn't wash off, and he didn't pretend otherwise. But he became something else, a bridge between worlds, a man who'd found redemption not through abandoning his nature but through channeling it toward protection instead of just power. Whitney married him in a small ceremony with just their closest family. No politicians or criminals, just the people who actually mattered. Lily was the flower girl, beaming in a white dress, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected, she shouted, "I already picked him." The last scene of this story isn't dramatic. No shootouts, no betrayals, no final confrontation. It's just Song Woo, sitting in a townhouse in Brooklyn on Christmas Eve, watching his daughter, because she was his daughter now, biology be damned, open presents while his wife made hot chocolate in the kitchen. Outside, snow fell on New York City, covering the blood and grime and sin with something clean and white and temporary. Song's phone buzzed. Business, always business. But for the first time in his life, Song Woo let it go to voicemail. Because some things were more important than empire. Some promises mattered more than power. A little girl had once asked him to come to her house. And in accepting that invitation, Song Woo had found the one thing he'd never known he was missing. A home worth protecting, a family worth dying for, a reason to be more than the mirror. Sometimes salvation doesn't look like redemption. Sometimes it looks like a 6-year-old girl in a pink puffy coat, asking a monster if he celebrates Christmas. And sometimes, miraculously, the monster learns to say yes. So what did you think? Did Song Woo find true redemption? Or is he still the same man beneath it all? Can people like him really change? Or was he just wearing a different mask? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing what you think about the characters and their choices. And if this story touched you, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we've got another story dropping that you absolutely cannot miss. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments too, because we love hearing from our global family. And your support means everything to us. Until next time, remember. Sometimes the most dangerous place to be is safe. Sometimes the greatest risk is loving something more than power. And sometimes, just sometimes, even monsters can find their way home. I'll see you in the next video.